The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as General Marcus Crawford stepped out of his black sedan. His polished boots clicked against the concrete as he adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform, heavy with ribbons and medals that told the story of his distinguished 30-year career. Today was important, a high-level inspection of the new engineering facility that would determine funding for the next fiscal year. Crawford was known throughout the military for his sharp tongue and unforgiving standards. He had earned his reputation by demanding excellence from everyone under his command, but he also carried an old-fashioned view that certain people belonged in certain places. In his mind, the military was still very much a man's world, especially when it came to the technical and engineering divisions. As he approached the main engineering building, Crawford noticed several personnel gathered around the entrance. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, hurried to catch up with him, clipboard in hand and a slightly nervous expression on his face. "Sir, there's been a slight change in today's schedule," Peterson began carefully. "The chief engineer you were supposed to meet with had a family emergency this morning. His second-in-command will be conducting the tour instead." Crawford barely looked up from straightening his jacket. "Fine, as long as they know what they're talking about. I don't have time for amateur presentations today. The Pentagon wants a full report by Monday, and I intend to give them one that reflects the true state of this operation." The general had built his career on making quick judgments and sticking to them. He believed that first impressions revealed everything he needed to know about a person's competence and dedication. It was a philosophy that had served him well in combat situations, but it also made him prone to snap decisions that weren't always fair or accurate. As they entered the building, Crawford immediately began his mental evaluation. The facility was clean and well organized, with state-of-the-art equipment visible through the glass windows of various workshops and laboratories. Engineers and technicians moved purposefully through the corridors, some carrying blueprints, others wheeling equipment from one station to another. "Where exactly is this replacement engineer?" Crawford asked impatiently, checking his watch. "I have 3 more facilities to inspect today, and I can't afford to fall behind schedule." Peterson consulted his notes. "She should be meeting us in the main workshop area, sir. I believe she's finishing up some last-minute preparations for the demonstration." The word "she" made Crawford's eyebrows rise slightly, but he said nothing. In his experience, women in technical roles were often given positions they weren't truly qualified for, part of what he saw as the military's misguided push for political correctness. He had seen too many instances where standards were lowered to accommodate diversity goals, and it frustrated him to no end. They walked through several corridors before reaching the main workshop, a vast space filled with complex machinery, computer workstations, and half-assembled prototypes. The air hummed with activity as various teams worked on different projects. Crawford's trained eye took in the scene, looking for signs of inefficiency or disorder that he could include in his report. That's when he saw her. In the far corner of the workshop, a figure in dark blue overalls was bent over a complex piece of machinery, completely absorbed in her work. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms that showed the evidence of hands-on engineering work. She held a wrench in one hand and was making precise adjustments to what appeared to be some kind of hydraulic system. Crawford's face immediately hardened. Here was exactly what he had expected, someone more concerned with getting dirty than with professional presentation. In his view, real engineers supervised and designed. They didn't get their hands dirty like common mechanics. "Is that our tour guide?" he asked Peterson with barely concealed disdain. "She looks more like maintenance staff than someone qualified to brief a general officer." Peterson double-checked his paperwork, looking uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. That appears to be Dr. Sarah Chen. She's listed as the Deputy Chief Engineer for Advanced Systems Development." The title did nothing to improve Crawford's mood. He had seen plenty of people with impressive titles who couldn't deliver results. What mattered to him was competence and professionalism, and this woman's appearance suggested neither. As they approached, the woman looked up from her work. She had intelligent brown eyes and a face that showed both concentration and confidence. When she saw the approaching group, she quickly wiped her hands on a shop rag and began walking toward them. Crawford's disapproval deepened as he took in her appearance up close. The overalls were clean but clearly well used, with small stains that spoke of regular hands-on work. Her boots were steel-toed work boots rather than dress shoes. To Crawford, this was evidence of someone who didn't understand the importance of military bearing and proper presentation. "General Crawford?" she asked, extending a hand that still showed traces of grease despite her attempt to clean it. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I'll be conducting your tour today." Crawford reluctantly shook her hand, his face showing clear disapproval. "Dr. Chen, I have to say I expected someone with your position to present a more professional appearance. This is a formal inspection, not a shop floor visit." Sarah's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her eyes. "I apologize for my appearance, General. I was making some final adjustments to ensure everything would be operating at peak efficiency for your visit. I thought you'd want to see our systems performing at their absolute best." "What I want to see," Crawford replied coldly, "is evidence that this facility is being run by people who understand military standards and protocols. Professional presentation is part of that standard. It reflects attention to detail and respect for the chain of command." Several nearby engineers and technicians had begun to take notice of the conversation. Some looked uncomfortable at the general's tone, while others watched with interest to see how their colleague would respond to the criticism. Sarah nodded carefully. "I understand your concern, General. Perhaps we should begin the tour so you can evaluate the substance of our work. I think you'll find that our results speak for themselves." Crawford's expression suggested he doubted that very much. "Let's hope so, Dr. Chen. I've seen too many facilities that prioritize appearance over performance, and frankly, just as many that prioritize neither. The military can't afford either approach." As Sarah began to lead them toward the first demonstration area, Crawford turned to Peterson and spoke just loudly enough for others to hear. "Make a note that we need to discuss proper dress codes and professional standards with facility leadership. If this is what passes for appropriate attire among senior staff, I'm concerned about the overall discipline and attention to detail in this operation." The comment stung, and Sarah's step faltered slightly. She had dealt with dismissive attitudes before. It came with the territory of being a woman in engineering, especially in the military. But something about Crawford's particular brand of condescension felt especially pointed and personal. She took a deep breath and continued walking, her shoulders straight despite the criticism. Behind her, she could hear Crawford continuing his commentary to Peterson about the importance of military bearing and the concerning trend of relaxed standards in technical units. What General Crawford didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Dr. Sarah Chen carried with her a story that would soon turn his assumptions completely upside down. Hidden beneath those practical overalls was something that would force the general to confront not just his prejudices about her, but his understanding of service, sacrifice, and what true military bearing really meant. As they moved deeper into the facility, Sarah began pointing out various systems and explaining their capabilities. Her knowledge was clearly extensive, and her explanations were both technically accurate and easy to understand. Despite himself, Crawford found the information impressive, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. The real test was still to come, and neither the general nor the engineer knew just how dramatically this routine inspection was about to change both of their lives. The tour continued through the facility with Sarah demonstrating system after system, each more impressive than the last. Despite his initial prejudices, General Crawford found himself genuinely surprised by the sophistication of the engineering work being done. The advanced radar systems, the new armor plating technologies, and the revolutionary communication networks all showed levels of innovation that exceeded his expectations. Sarah moved through the demonstrations with quiet confidence, explaining complex technical concepts in terms that were both precise and accessible. She answered every question Crawford posed, often providing additional context that showed her deep understanding of not just the technical aspects, but the practical military applications of each system. This adaptive armor plating, Sarah explained as she led them to a testing station, can redistribute impact force across a much wider area than traditional designs. We've seen a 47% improvement in protection effectiveness in field tests, while actually reducing overall weight by 12%. Crawford examined the materials closely, running his hands over the innovative plating design. What's the cost difference compared to current standard equipment? Initially higher, Sarah admitted, but the improved durability means replacement costs drop by roughly 60% over a 5-year period. We've also streamlined the manufacturing process, so production costs should decrease significantly once we move to full-scale implementation. The general nodded, making notes on his tablet. Despite his continued disapproval of Sarah's appearance, he couldn't deny the quality of the work being presented. However, his fundamental assumptions about her remained unchanged. As they moved to the next demonstration area, Crawford noticed several technicians and engineers watching their group with obvious respect for Sarah. They clearly looked to her for guidance and seemed to value her opinions. This only increased his confusion about the disconnect between her casual appearance and her apparent competence. "Dr. Chen," he said as they walked, "I'm curious about your background. Your technical knowledge is adequate, but I'm wondering how someone with your apparent disregard for military protocols ended up in such a senior position." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her professional tone. "I've been with military engineering for 8 years, General. I started in field operations before moving into research and development. I believe my record speaks for itself." "Field operations?" Crawford's tone became even more skeptical. "You mean you were deployed? In what capacity? Maintenance support? Administrative coordination?" Several people within earshot exchanged glances. There was something in Sarah's expression that suggested Crawford was venturing into territory he didn't fully understand, but the general was too focused on his preconceptions to notice the warning signs. "I was deployed multiple times," Sarah replied carefully. "Afghanistan primarily. I served as a combat engineer focusing on explosive device detection and disposal, as well as infrastructure protection." Crawford waved dismissively. "Support roles? Then, that explains the hands-on approach, I suppose, though I'd think your current position would require more strategic thinking and less manual labor." The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Several of the engineers had stopped their work to listen, and Peterson was looking increasingly uncomfortable with his general's line of questioning. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Crawford directly. "General, with respect, I think there may be some misunderstanding about my background and qualifications. Perhaps we should focus on the technical demonstrations you came here to evaluate." But Crawford was in full stride now, convinced he had identified the problem with the facility's leadership structure. "Dr. Chen, I appreciate your dedication. I really do. But there's a difference between working hard and working smart. Leadership positions require people who understand the bigger picture, not just the technical details. The military needs engineers who can think strategically, not just people who are good with their hands." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person within earshot had stopped what they were doing. Some looked angry, others looked uncomfortable, but all of them were focused on how Sarah would respond to this latest insult. Sarah stood quietly for a moment, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that Crawford suddenly realized was perfectly military in its bearing. When she spoke, Her voice was calm, but carried an undertone that suggested depths he hadn't yet understood. General, I understand your concerns about strategic thinking and leadership capability. Perhaps it would help if I shared a bit more about my background so you can make a more informed assessment. Crawford crossed his arms, his expression suggesting he was prepared to endure whatever explanation she felt necessary to offer. 8 years ago, Sarah began, I was a newly commissioned officer in the Army Corps of Engineers. My first deployment was to Afghanistan, where I was assigned to a forward operating base in Helmand Province. My job was to identify and neutralize improvised explosive devices that were targeting our supply convoys. Crawford's expression didn't change, but something in Sarah's tone made him pay closer attention. During my second deployment, my team was called to investigate reports of a new type of IED that had been targeting schools and medical facilities. These devices were more sophisticated than anything we'd seen before, and they were specifically designed to cause maximum casualties among civilians. Sarah's voice remained steady, but there was a weight to her words now that made everyone lean in to listen. On March 15, 2018, we received reports that one of these devices had been placed in a girls' school in a village outside Kandahar. Intelligence suggested there were 12 devices total, all connected to a single trigger mechanism. The school had over 200 students, all between the ages of 6 and 16. Crawford found himself actually listening now, his attention fully engaged for the first time since the tour had begun. My team arrived to find that the devices were more complex than anything we'd encountered. They were designed with multiple fail-safes and anti-tampering mechanisms. Conventional disposal methods wouldn't work because of the interconnected triggering system. Any mistake would set off all 12 devices simultaneously. The workshop had grown completely quiet. Even people who had heard this story before were listening with rapt attention. We had two choices, Sarah continued. We could evacuate the school and destroy the building, leaving the community without their only educational facility. Or we could attempt a manual disarmament, knowing that the slightest error would trigger all the devices. Crawford realized he was holding his breath. I made the decision to attempt the manual disarmament. It took 4 hours, working device by device, while 200 children waited in a temporary safe zone we'd established. Every cut wire, every disconnected circuit could have been the last thing I ever did. Sarah paused, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the present moment, remembering. We succeeded. All 12 devices were neutralized. The school remained intact, and those 200 children were able to return to their education. But during the process, my team came under enemy fire. We lost 2 good people that day, Sergeant Martinez and Corporal Johnson. They died protecting those children and protecting me while I finished the job. The silence in the room was complete. Crawford felt something shifting in his understanding, though he wasn't yet ready to acknowledge it fully. That operation, General, required both technical expertise and strategic thinking. It required understanding not just the immediate tactical situation, but the broader implications for the community, for the mission, and for the safety of innocent civilians. It required leadership under pressure and the ability to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information. Sarah's gaze met Crawford's directly. I share this not to boast about my service, but to help you understand that strategic thinking and hands-on technical work aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes the most important strategic decisions are made by people who truly understand the technical realities of a situation. Crawford found himself speechless for the first time in years. The woman he had dismissed as an inappropriately dressed technician had just described exactly the kind of leadership and strategic thinking he claimed to value most. But Sarah wasn't finished. She reached up and slowly unzipped the top portion of her overalls, revealing the collar of a white shirt underneath. And there, pinned to that collar, was something that made General Crawford's world suddenly shift on its axis. It was small, distinctive, and unmistakable to anyone with military experience. The sight of it would change everything Crawford thought he knew about the woman standing before him and force him to confront assumptions that had shaped his entire career. The Medal of Honor rested quietly on Sarah's collar, its distinctive blue ribbon and gold star catching the workshop's fluorescent lights. The small piece of metal seemed to command the entire room, drawing every eye and silencing every breath. For General Crawford, it was as if the world had suddenly stopped spinning. He stared at the medal, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The Medal of Honor was the highest decoration for valor in the United States military, awarded only for acts of extraordinary heroism in combat. In his 30-year career, Crawford had met only 3 other recipients. He knew the weight of what that small medal represented, not just personal courage, but sacrifice that went beyond the call of duty. Crawford's voice came out as barely a whisper. That's the Medal of Honor. Sarah nodded quietly, zipping her overalls back up so the medal was hidden again. Yes, sir. It was awarded for the action I just described, for the school operation and the decisions made under fire that day. The general felt the floor shifting beneath his feet. Every assumption he had made, every judgment he had passed, every dismissive comment he had offered suddenly came rushing back to him with crushing clarity. He had spent the morning mocking and belittling a Medal of Honor recipient, one of the most decorated soldiers in the United States military. Peterson was staring open-mouthed, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. The engineers and technicians throughout the workshop had stopped all pretense of working and were watching the scene unfold with a mixture of pride in their colleague and shock at the general's obvious discomfort. Crawford's mind raced back through the morning's events, her calm professionalism in the face of his insults, her deep technical knowledge combined with strategic understanding, the way other personnel looked at her with obvious respect, the quiet confidence that he had mistaken for insubordination. Everything suddenly made sense in a way that left him feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Dr. Chen, he began, his voice shaking slightly, I owe you a profound apology. I made assumptions about you based on superficial observations, and those assumptions were not only wrong, but deeply inappropriate. Sarah looked at him steadily. General, with respect, the apology I need isn't for me. It's for every person you've ever judged based on their appearance rather than their capabilities. It's for every woman, every minority, every person who doesn't fit your preconceived notion of what a leader should look like. The words hit Crawford like a physical blow, but he knew she was right. This wasn't just about one embarrassing moment. It was about a pattern of thinking that had shaped his entire approach to leadership and evaluation. You want to know why I wear these overalls? Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. It's because the best leaders lead from the front. They understand the work being done by the people they lead. They're willing to get their hands dirty alongside their teams. Those stains on my clothes aren't signs of unprofessionalism. They're evidence that I'm doing my job completely. Crawford nodded slowly, beginning to understand the depth of his mistake. When I was in Afghanistan, Sarah went on, I learned that respect isn't earned by the shine on your boots or the crease in your uniform. It's earned by your willingness to do whatever needs to be done, regardless of how it looks. When I was defusing those bombs, I wasn't thinking about military bearing or proper presentation. I was thinking about 200 children who deserve to go to school safely. The general felt tears forming in his eyes, something that hadn't happened since his own father's funeral years earlier. Dr. Chen, you're absolutely right. I've spent so much time focusing on appearance and protocol that I lost sight of what actually matters. Your service, your sacrifice, your leadership. These are everything I claim to value, and I failed to recognize them when they were right in front of me. Sarah's expression softened slightly. General, I don't tell people about the medal because I want them to treat me differently. I want to be evaluated based on my work, my ideas, and my results. But when someone dismisses me because I don't fit their mental image of what a leader should be, sometimes it becomes necessary to provide context. Crawford looked around the workshop, taking in the faces of the people who had witnessed his behavior. Some looked angry, others disappointed, but many seemed willing to see what he would do next. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to start the tour over? I'd like to approach this inspection with the respect and professionalism you deserve. And I'd like to learn from someone whose leadership and technical expertise clearly exceed my own. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, looking for signs of sincerity. What she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. Of course, General, but I'd like to suggest we do it differently this time. Instead of me just showing you what we've built, why don't you tell me about the challenges you're facing in the field? Let's see if our innovations can address real problems rather than just impressing visitors. This approach caught Crawford completely off guard. In all his years of conducting inspections, no one had ever asked him about field challenges. They had simply shown him what they thought he wanted to see. That's exactly what we need, he said, genuine enthusiasm creeping into his voice for the first time that day. We're facing communication problems in urban environments, logistics challenges in extreme weather, and we desperately need better protection for forward operating bases. Sarah smiled, the first real smile Crawford had seen from her all morning. Then let's talk about solutions. Johnson, Martinez, can you bring up the urban communication array? Stevens, let's show the General the weather-resistant supply systems we've been testing. As the team sprang into action, Crawford realized he was witnessing something remarkable. This wasn't just technical competence. This was leadership at its finest. Sarah had transformed a formal inspection into a collaborative problem-solving session, and everyone in the workshop was energized and engaged. For the next 2 hours, Crawford experienced what a real inspection should be. He described challenges his units faced in the field, and Sarah's team demonstrated solutions that directly addressed those needs. They discussed practical applications, cost considerations, and implementation timelines. The General found himself taking more notes than he had in years, genuinely excited about the potential impact of what he was seeing. When the tour finally concluded, Crawford stood in the main workshop area, looking around at the impressive facility and the even more impressive team that ran it. He turned to Sarah, who was once again bent over a piece of equipment, making adjustments based on feedback from their discussions. "Dr. Chen," he called out, and she looked up. "I want you to know that this has been the most valuable inspection of my career. Not just because of the quality of the work being done here, but because of what you've taught me about leadership and about judging people properly." Sarah stood up and walked over to him, wiping her hands on her shop rag. "General, I hope you'll take those lessons with you to your other inspections and evaluations. There are a lot of good people out there doing important work, and they deserve to be evaluated fairly." Crawford nodded firmly. "You have my word on that, and Dr. Chen, thank you for your service. All of it. What you did in Afghanistan, what you're doing here, and what you've taught me today." As General Crawford left the facility, he carried with him more than just technical specifications and budget requirements. He carried the knowledge that true military bearing wasn't about appearance or protocol. It was about courage, competence, and the willingness to serve something greater than yourself. The woman in overalls had reminded him what real leadership looked like, and he would never forget the lesson. In his final report, Crawford would recommend not only full funding for the facility, but also that Dr. Sarah Chen be considered for promotion to chief engineer. More importantly, he would carry the memory of this day with him for the rest of his career, ensuring that he never again let prejudice blind him to excellence. The honor resting on Sarah's chest had taught the General that true honor comes not from the decorations we wear, but from the character we demonstrate and the service we provide to others. It was a lesson that would change not only how he conducted inspections, but how he lived his life.